3 years ago, the world watched in disbelief as Kabul fell. The images were stark and haunting, a city once bustling with life now overshadowed by an uncertain future. The Taliban, once banished to the shadows, swept back into power. Their return was swift and decisive, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in a war-torn nation. August 15, 2021 marked not just a change in government but the start of a profound unraveling. The day became a symbol of lost hope and shattered dreams for many Afghans. Promises of a more moderate regime quickly faded. The initial assurances of inclusivity and reform were replaced by a harsh reality as the Taliban's true intentions became clear. In their place, fear and uncertainty took root, tightening their grip on the Afghan people. The streets, once filled with the sounds of daily life, now echoed with silence and trepidation. The echoes of the past, once a distant nightmare, returned to haunt the streets of Afghanistan. Memories of the Taliban's previous rule resurfaced, bringing with them a sense of déjà vu and despair. The world held its breath, hoping against hope for a different outcome this time. International leaders expressed their concerns, and global citizens watched anxiously, but the reality on the ground told a different story. But for many Afghans, particularly women and girls, a dark premonition settled in their hearts, a sense of dread for what lay ahead. The hard-won freedoms of the past 2 decades seemed to slip away, replaced by a looming shadow of oppression. The world may have been caught off guard, but for them, the return of the Taliban felt like a cruel twist of fate, a betrayal of promises made, and a harbinger of freedom soon to be lost. Families packed their belongings, unsure of what the future held, while the Taliban solidified their control over public spaces, marking the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter in Afghanistan's history. For Afghan women, the Taliban's return signaled a swift and brutal regression. The very rights they fought so hard to secure over decades vanished almost overnight. They were once again relegated to the shadows, their voices silenced, their aspirations crushed under the weight of oppressive decrees. The Taliban's ideology leaves no room for the autonomy of women. They are seen as subservient, their roles confined to the domestic sphere. The vibrant tapestry of Afghan society, woven with the contributions of women in all walks of life, began to fray at the edges. Their absence from schools, universities, and workplaces left a void, a stark reminder of the Taliban's regressive grip on Afghan society. Education, once a beacon of hope for Afghan girls, is now a forbidden dream for many. The Taliban's ban on girls attending secondary school is a cruel blow, robbing them of their education and their futures. The classrooms that were once filled with their laughter and thirst for knowledge now stand eerily silent. The denial of education is not just an assault on individual potential, it is a deliberate crippling of a nation. It deprives Afghanistan of the talents and contributions of half its population, condemning it to a future shrouded in ignorance and stagnation. The world cannot stand by as an entire generation of girls is denied its fundamental right to learn and grow. The stories emerging from Afghanistan are heartbreaking testaments to the human cost of the Taliban's rule. Women like Medina, a young doctor who fled Kabul after the Taliban banned women from working in most fields, speak of their shattered dreams and the fear that now defines their lives.
I spent years studying, dreaming of serving my people. Now my skills are deemed worthless, my future erased. I am a prisoner in my own home, my spirit slowly dying.
Her story, echoed by countless others, paints a grim picture of the realities facing Afghan women under the Taliban's rule. A nation on the brink. The humanitarian catastrophe. The human rights crisis in Afghanistan is inseparable from a humanitarian catastrophe of immense proportions. Years of conflict, compounded by the Taliban's takeover and the subsequent withdrawal of international aid, have pushed the country to the brink. The economy lies in ruins, poverty is rampant, and hunger stalks the land. The statistics are staggering, painting a grim picture of a nation teetering on the edge of collapse. According to the United Nations, nearly 23 million Afghans, more than half the population, are facing acute hunger. Millions of children are malnourished, their tiny bodies ravaged by hunger, their futures uncertain. The face of hunger, malnutrition and economic collapse. The faces of Afghan children, once lit by hope and innocence, now bear the unmistakable marks of hunger. Their cheeks, once full and rosy, are now sunken and pale, a stark contrast to the vibrant life they once knew. Their hollow eyes and emaciated bodies stand as a searing indictment of the world's failure to alleviate their suffering. Each glance, each frail limb tells a story of neglect and abandonment, a cry for help that has gone unanswered. The economic collapse, exacerbated by the Taliban's policies and the international community's sanctions, has pushed millions into poverty. Families who once had stable incomes now find themselves struggling to afford even the most basic necessities. The once bustling markets now stand as grim reminders of a thriving economy brought to its knees. Stalls that were once filled with fresh produce and goods are now empty, the air thick with the weight of despair and uncertainty. Farmers struggle to feed their families, their livelihoods shattered by drought and conflict. The land, once fertile and bountiful, now lies barren, unable to yield the crops that sustained entire communities. The desperation is palpable, etched on the faces of mothers forced to make impossible choices, torn between feeding one child over another or selling their few remaining possessions to buy a meager meal. Their children's cries for food echoing in their ears, a haunting reminder of the dire situation they face daily. The sound of hunger is a constant companion, a relentless reminder of the fragility of life in the face of such overwhelming adversity. A generation in peril. The health crisis gripping Afghan children. The humanitarian crisis has manifested in a health emergency, with children bearing the brunt of the suffering. Hospitals are overflowing with malnourished children, their tiny bodies fighting a losing battle against preventable diseases. The healthcare system, already fragile before the Taliban's takeover, is now on the verge of collapse. The lack of essential medicines, medical equipment, and qualified personnel has turned treatable illnesses into death sentences. The cries of sick children, their mothers' pleas for help echoing through the corridors of overwhelmed hospitals, paint a chilling picture of a generation at risk. The world's silence, a deaf ear to Afghanistan's pleas. The world has watched the unfolding tragedy in Afghanistan with a mixture of horror and helplessness. The international community's response, however, has been muted, hampered by political considerations and a reluctance to engage with the Taliban regime. While humanitarian aid trickles in, it is a mere drop in the ocean of need. The lack of formal recognition for the Taliban government has created a political impasse, hindering the flow of much-needed aid and investment. The Afghan people, caught in the crosshairs of geopolitics, are paying the price for the world's inaction. The cost of inaction, a future forsaken. The cost of inaction is not merely measured in dollars or euros, but in human lives. The faces of those who suffer tell a story of neglect and abandonment. Every day that passes without a coordinated and compassionate response from the international community deepens the suffering of the Afghan people. Children grow up in uncertainty, and families are torn apart by the relentless hardships they face. It is a betrayal of the promises made to the Afghan people, a tacit acceptance of their plight. The international community's silence is deafening, and its inaction is a stark reminder of broken promises. The world cannot afford to turn its back on Afghanistan. The stakes are too high and the moral cost is too great. We must remember our shared humanity and act with urgency. The consequences of inaction extend far beyond the borders of this war-torn nation. Instability in Afghanistan can ripple across regions, affecting global security and economic stability, a breeding ground for extremism where radical ideologies can take root and spread, threatening peace and security worldwide. A humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, with millions in desperate need of food, shelter, and medical care. The images of suffering are a call to action, and a generation lost to poverty and despair. Children who should be learning and playing are instead struggling to survive. These are the potential legacies of the world's indifference. We must not let this future come to pass. The time to act is now, for the sake of Afghanistan and for the sake of our shared humanity. A bridge too far? Rebuilding trust and aid. Rebuilding trust and providing aid to Afghanistan will require a nuanced and long-term approach. The international community must find ways to engage with the Taliban, not as an endorsement of their ideology, but as a means to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people. Humanitarian aid must be de-linked from political considerations and delivered to those who need it most. The focus should be on providing life-saving assistance, supporting healthcare, and reviving the shattered economy. Investing in education, particularly for girls, is crucial for Afghanistan's long-term stability and development. Remember Afghanistan. 3 years on, Afghanistan stands at a crossroads. The path ahead is fraught with challenges, but the resilience of the Afghan people offers a glimmer of hope. The world cannot afford to forget Afghanistan or its people. Their struggle is our struggle, their humanity intertwined with our own. Let us answer their call for help, not with silence or indifference, but with compassion and action. Let us build bridges of understanding, support, and solidarity. Let us remember Afghanistan not for its war-torn past, but for its potential for a brighter future, a future we can help create.